once we had mediastinoscopy, I will follow up on what Felix already told you. And here, that's what I started out with also with TBNA. I don't want to go into detail because Felix was there, but that's what we had. And this is what my daily life, because we have the TBNA, and then we got the Swedish guy who developed the mediastinoscopy. And you see, when you see these pictures, now you can understand why thoracic surgeons may be not very fond of this procedure. There's a lot of vessels and a lot of very important structures which we can biopsy. And most of us who have done mediastinoscopy have biopsied every organ that is in the mediastinum, even the esophagus. And here's one of the other reasons why we don't like it. You see a lymph node with a mediastinoscopy. There is the biopsy forces. We get a very, very nice biopsy. So that's why I did not really like the mediastinoscopy. What I did then, I went to Germany, to Heidelberg, because Heidelberg had worked with those EBUS probes for years, and they had made a lot of things, development of this probe, started with the cardiologist. And you have seen this picture already. I liked, when I saw that picture, I can see something, and maybe I could use this method for doing my staging and diagnosis for my patients before operations. And you have seen this, with the development. There was very nice instruments which we could use in our scopes. And here you see the different types, also for the peripheral lung. But I was trained as a surgeon, and the first thing you learn as a surgeon, if you can't see what you're doing, don't do it. And I didn't like that when I went to Heidelberg and they taught me how to use the EBUS probe. I thought it was blind. Okay, I put down the probe, I found the lymph node, I took it out and put the needle out and hope that I didn't miss it. So we needed something where we real time could see what we were doing. What happened for me was that as a thoracic surgeon, I also operated upon esophagus patients, esophagus cancers. So I bought an EUS scope. At that time, there was no needle, but I used it to get an idea of how much the esophagus cancer has spread inside the mediastinum. Then I got the needles, and then I discovered when I used the scope in the esophagus, I could see the lymph nodes in the mediastinum. Then I made a telephone call to Olympus in Denmark, and then we invited Japanese people there. And there you see 3 guys from Olympus Japan. One of them is still there. And then there is a couple of guys, some thoracic surgeons and some pulmonologists. And I was there also. No gray hair, but no hair as that time either. I proposed at that time, at that meeting, that why couldn't you, I thought Japanese is very good to make big things small. So I thought, why don't you take the EUS scope and just make it smaller? Okay, they went home and they started out in 98. We got a mechanical scanning methods with a radial probe, mechanical, and it looked like that. It was not really easy to use, and I didn't like this first prototype. Then we got this one here, and it was in 2002. You see how it looked like. Looked very much like the EOS scope, but we tried to use it. It was still too big, and we didn't like it, so the answer was no. And we still said, why don't you make a scope that just looked like an EOS scope, the same way and the same way. There you see, they have the GI EOS scope, and there you see the first prototype of the EBUS scope. We didn't have a name at that time. First, we couldn't call it EBUS, because EBUS was something else with radial probes. And the second word we named it was the puncture scope. But we didn't like that either, because the first procedures we did, we mostly punctured the scope. So it was Felix who came up with the name EBUS-TBNA because it's an EBUS system and we use TBNA, and that's stock. And there you see how it looked like from the start. And there you see the second prototype, which we really used in our daily procedures. And you see here, this is how the system looked like. It was a 5 to 12 megahertz linear scanner. It was very not easy to handle. And we got a needle. We got an adapter for the needle. And you see here what it looked like at that time, what we have with the needle and with the scope. And there's the balloon also for the scope. And there you see the needle. This is a Olympus idea with puncturing the needle, so there's small holes in there, and it really makes them more visible. I don't understand how it works, but it works. And this was the processor we had from the start. And there you see the date from this procedure. It was done in 2002 in December, and it was before anybody else heard about EBUS-TBNA. And you see the quality was not that bad. And we still hope that even they make it smaller and smaller, the EBUS-TBNA scope, that they can keep the quality. We also have the Doppler there, so we have everything that we have today. And we were very happy for that. And we made many other results. And there you see, already in January 2003, the first paper was published from Copenhagen. You see, it was a thoracic surgeon, it was a gastroenterologist, Peter Willmann. He was the guy who was together developed the EUS, and he was the one who developed the EUS needle. And then we got a pathologist, and then we have a student also to make all the arrangements. So we always wanted to have more, so I bought this processor, which I could use to both EUS and to the EBUS, because I was still using the EUS scope. But you know, size matters. And when that really matters, we have to put everything together in a small place. And that's why the Olympus developed this processor where we doesn't feel much, you can put it anywhere, and we can use it for everything. I was always told how we could make such a success of it. You see, the first thing is that Felix Herth and we decided very early to pool our data. We had a common database, so his patients and my patients went into the same database. So that's why we so fast could do the papers. At the same time, we made a little focus group. There's Armin Ernst, he's from the States, from Howard, and there's Yasser Fugus, whom you heard about. He was in Japan at that time, and Felix, who was from Germany, and then it was I. We were meeting together and make discussion on how to implement the EBUS-TBNA system. So you see, in 2004, we already have published publication number 2, 3, and 4. And that was because we pooled our data. That's really the reason that we grew so fast. But we are also discovered because the ESTS made this lymph node map. And when we used this lymph node map, it was very easy for us to see if we combined EUS and EBUS-TBNA together, then we could have a very throughout staging of the mediastinum. So we made the first papers of that. We pooled our data also there, Felix and I, and we proved that the EUS-FNA and EBUS-TBNA used two different types were very good idea to use that. But really, it was not spread out. I don't think pulmonologists and many thoracic surgeons like to do the EUS scope, mostly because the anatomy is very difficult when you do a EUS. So it was first until Felix's group published that they could use an EBUS scope both in the esophagus and in the bronchial tree that it began to spread. Then in 2007, Yasser Fugu came out with a study where he proved that EBUS-TBNA could use for sarcoidosis. Until then, we always thought about cancer. Then the first review also in 2007 was made, and it was the use of cytology of EGF. And then in 2008, lymphoma. We were discussing why not use EBUS-TBNA in lymphoma instead of always doing mediastinoscopy in those patients. And it was tried, and we worked it out, but it doesn't really spread out. But we found out also that diagnosis of metastasis in the mediastinal from other organs was possible with using the EBUS-TBNA scope. And in 2009, the first meta-analysis and the first randomized study were published. And then the first complication was mentioned. Then chemosensitivity and cell receptors were very much discussed in using cytology from EBUS-TBNA. In 2010, we can see that everybody was using the EBUS-TBNA scope, and we got so many publications to review. And now we were looking beyond cancers. Because we now could see TBA, number of station punctures were discussed. One scope, as you see in esophagus and trachea, cost-benefit, learning curves, sedation, elastography were the main topics. But, you see, it was very difficult for us to convince thoracic surgeons about using the EBUS-TBNA. They were all very late in using it. But in 2011, the mediastinal was still the golden standard. But then another randomized study was published, and in 2011, more papers on hematological diseases and more receptors were demonstrated in cytology. And you saw at those receptors, we now, every day, a new receptor is discovered using EBUS-TBNA. Then the biopsy forceps were introduced, and then, of course, more complications. The more we used the procedure, the more complications. Then in 2012, we got the 19-gauge needle, and then we introduced the cell block and ROSE. The first paper using EBUS-TBNA in treatment was described, and that year was also the year of the adaptor trial, which was very important in this. And that was another randomized study. In 2013, there's a year for molecular biology and EBUS-TBNA. There were so many papers on that topic. And we could see now that on the papers that EBUS-TBNA was now established in staging and diagnostic process of cancer in the lung or mediastinum. In 2014, since then, the number have stabilized in 15 and 16. But in 2014, we got the ESTS guidelines, where they accepted the EBUS-TBNA. And that was the year, I think, that we, thoracic surgeons, lost the mediastinal. This I borrowed from Felix. You see, here was the guidelines we got in 2007, but already there, the thoracic surgeon didn't like a negative EBUS-TBNA. They didn't trust it. So if we have a negative EBUS-TBNA result, we have to do a mediastinoscopy. But then we have this randomized trial from Anima. That was who spoiled the golden standard of the mediastinoscopy. And after that, CHEST made new guidelines, and the new guidelines look like this, that now you can use a negative EBUS-TBNA as a result before operation. But, if you don't trust it, if you don't see something that a positive PET scan and a big lymph node and it's still negative, then they still ask us to do a mediastinoscopy. So it's very important for everybody of you who use the EBUS-TBNA in the staging of lung cancers that you know exactly your negative and positive predictive values of your procedures, how good you are to use the system. Another reason that we was such a success, even before it was commercialized, we made courses. Here is a picture from one of the first courses we did in Heidelberg. For many years we did one course in Copenhagen and one course in Heidelberg, and we are still doing the courses in Heidelberg. So we spread it, we try to implement it as fast as possible. So what I can conclude on this one here is we have EBUS-TBNA in a very short time. It revolutionized the diagnosis of chest diseases and the staging of lung cancer. But there's still room for improvement of the system, and the role of EBUS-TBNA is still developing. We are finding new areas all the same. We get more and more peripherally with the scope inside the lungs. But what is also is a very good example of how we can work together, the clinicians and the industry and medicine, how to do something together with a fast track to implement something which is worthwhile for the patients and the healthcare systems. It took less than 10 years to do it. And that's why we planned it very, very thoroughly, Felix and I. How are we going to implement this much faster? We had a lot of publications before it was commercialized. We went to every congress and told about it, even before people could buy it. So thank you very much. This is what I will tell you.